This video is just going to be a minor bug fixing video, and there's a few little issues that my students have pointed out to me. And so I just want to go over some common errors that they may have come across, or you may have come across if you're not one of my students, and maybe you've kind of given up and you've gone, oh, it's too hard, I don't understand it. So one of the things is that sometimes if you kind of get locked into a corner or a whole lot of enemies surround you, generally you should die before that happens, but you will kind of, the player will float up in the air. Now to fix that, what we want to do is to go to this part here where it says look at, and this should be fine. It is this bit, we want to make sure that that is set to 0 for the player. Now also one other thing, if you are using you'll notice on my player that I have got a capsule mesh. No, it's this collision detection mesh is actually a cylinder. It's not a capsule. If you use a capsule, and I do have a capsule there, for that collision shape, which I shouldn't. You want to use a cylinder shape. I'm going to rotate that 0 degrees like that and bring it in a little bit, so it's just smaller than that area shape there. Now that collision shape will mean that it won't kind of get caught on things down here and then start to rise up at all. So changing that to a collision shape will fix one of those errors. Now another error is the enemies also kind of lean back and look at you. And this is a little bit of you need a little bit of an understanding of how the origins of these things work and what's kind of happening in 3D. So when we tell the enemy to look at the player, I've told it to look at the 0 position down here. But if your enemy is kind of like this, it's going to be down here and looking up at the player, because it's going to look like that. It's going to look at there. And so it's going to lean back a little bit as it looks towards the player. And as it gets closer to the player, it's going to lean back further and further and further. And this is why the capsule of your guy will kind of slide onto it and fly up into the air. And as the enemies move towards you, you kind of fly up into the air with it. So there's a few things to do to fix that. First of all, you should have this flat on the 0 bit there. So that we'll go to the enemy script. I'm just going to do it in one of them because you'll need to do it in both anyway. This bit here where it says look at, I'm going to say pos.y equals 0. And you can force it to do that. Okay, so the position.y equals 0, it won't change. This has fixed most of the problems that my students have had. Also, the collision shape for this should be a cylinder. Okay, once again, it's like that. So what it's going to do is from here, which is the origin of this bit of code here, it's going to rotate this point to look at the player. So they're kind of looking at each other there. We're not going from the head or anything like that. We're rotating from this point because that's common between the two things. And we're going to make it look at the player. If your enemy, like I said, if it's down here and it looks at the player, which is here, it's going to make this point look at the player. So it's going to rotate slightly like that. And then this point here will be looking at that position there. Then as it gets closer, it's going to rotate further and further back and move towards the player. We're making it move, translate along its local axis, so it kind of flies up into the air. So that was a pretty common error that I saw. Another common error was with the tracer fire. And if I click on this here, you'll see that my origin is here. Okay, that's where your origin should be for any object, right in the center. Generally, there's reasons for it not to be, but generally you want it there. And I've set the rest of the stuff to be along the negative z-axis, not the positive z-axis, but the negative z-axis. So I've kind of pulled it back from there and gone along that negative. It's going to, when it gets instantiated, it's going to, the origin is this point here. So that's where it gets created. The 2D position on our chain gun end will be where this point gets created, and then this is going to be in front of the gun straight away. Now there is another thing in here. This bit of code can be replaced with a better bit of code that says set axis velocity. And this is going to mean that your gun is not going to accelerate. it's just going to instantaneously fire. So if I just hit this, you'll see the difference between it.
Oh yeah.
Bang, 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 bang.
Okay, so I get that tracer fire. Now I could turn that speed down a little bit. My speed's quite high, and it's not going to accelerate anymore. That's still pretty high. Maybe go to 1000. Because it's not doing the initial accelerator. That's even still too high. Wow. Let's go. Well, I don't know what happened. Maybe I've bugged it out here. Oh, I've got an export value on that. That's why. So I'll actually have to go to here and look at this value, which is 20,000. Let's turn it down to 5,000 and see what happens. See, 20,000 was good when it's accelerating from nothing, but now it's got an instantaneous thing, which is more realistic. Now there was a few other errors, and I just need to kind of think about what they may have been, just as I go through here. Oh yes, the tracer fire. These are the things that you need to turn on. I did mention this in an earlier video, but I just wanted to cover that here. One other common thing is that students were dragging the GLTF into the scene, which obviously does work, but it has no collisions on it. So if you want to have collisions on it, you will need to double click it and go through. I did explain this in an earlier video, so this is just for people that kind of skimmed through. That may be an issue. So if your collisions aren't working, it's because you've dragged the model in and not the scene that we made. That was pretty common. I had a few students that had dragged, made the scene, they'd made it properly. They put the collisions on it, but they were dragging the model in. In the next video, these were the most common errors. If you have an error, post it down below and I'll get back to you. And I'll usually answer within the day. So just keep an eye out on the comments below. In the next video, what I'm going to do is just going to be a fun one, and we're going to turn it into a first-person shooter. So I've had a few people ask how we could do that. It's actually not that difficult. It does require a little bit of a rewrite of the player script, and but most of it is just going to be changing the camera. And then we're going to kind of turn it into a Wolfenstein clone. I mean the original Wolfenstein, where you can just rotate left and right with the mouse. You can't look up and down. That's going to be a video that I'll do at another time. And I'm also looking at doing some other things, such as taking old games and remaking them in Godot, just to see how they work and how they could be made in a modern game engine. So that's coming up. Next video though will be the first person shooter.